It was supposed to be a night of quiet nostalgia, a final bittersweet tour through the stone heart of history. My name is Leo, and for 3 years, the echoing corridors of Eastern State Penitentiary had been my workplace. I was a night guard, but I saw myself as more of a custodian of memory. I walked these cell blocks not with a sense of authority, but with a historian's reverence. Tonight was my last shift. A better-paying, soul-crushingly dull corporate security gig awaited me in the morning. I was trading Gothic grandeur and chilling silence for fluorescent lights and the hum of servers. Part of me was relieved. Another part felt like I was abandoning a post. I began my final patrol just after midnight. The air was cool and heavy, smelling of damp stone and a century of dust. I knew every groan of the building, every trick of the light that could make a shadow seem to writhe in the corner of your eye. I'd heard all the stories from the daytime tour guides, the phantom laughter in Al Capone's cell, the shadowy figure that darts across the catwalk of cell block 12. I was a professional skeptic. To me, these were just tales to sell tickets, the creaks and groans of an ancient structure settling into its grave. I had control here. I knew the reality of this place: iron, stone, and silence. My routine was an ingrained ritual. First, a perimeter check, then a slow walk through the radial plan, my flashlight beam cutting a clean, rational path through the oppressive darkness. The main cell blocks branched off the central rotunda like the spokes of a great broken wheel. I started with cell block 4, its empty cells staring like hollow eye sockets. The silence was absolute, a presence in itself. It was a silence I had come to appreciate, a stark contrast to the noise of the city outside. The first anomaly occurred as I entered cell block 7, the infamous hole. This was where the worst of the worst were sent for solitary confinement. The cells were smaller here, the doors thicker, designed to swallow sound and sanity. That's when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scraping. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. It was a dry, grating sound like metal on stone. I stopped, holding my breath, straining my ears. Old buildings make noises. I knew this. A piece of loose rebar shifting in the concrete. Maybe a rat dragging a piece of debris. I swept my light across the row of cell doors. All were sealed shut, their ancient locks long since seized by rust. The sound seemed to be coming from the far end of the block, from a cell I knew had been sealed for decades. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, the words sounding small and foolish in the immense quiet. But there was no wind tonight. The air was unnaturally still. I continued my walk, the sound fading behind me. But a small, cold knot had formed in my stomach. It was a deviation from the script, a discordant note in the symphony of silence I knew so well. An hour later, as I was patrolling the upper tier of cell block 12, I saw the second thing, a flicker of movement below, at the very edge of my vision. I snapped my head down, my powerful flashlight beam spearing the darkness. Nothing. Just a long, empty corridor lined with peeling paint and the ghosts of forgotten men. I stood there for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. Tired eyes, Leo, I told myself. It was late. My mind was playing tricks on me, colored by the melancholy of my departure. I believed in rational explanations. I had to. It was the foundation upon which my sanity was built, especially in a place like this. But the foundation was beginning to crack. As I passed the old infirmary, a place that always gave me a chill with its rusted medical equipment and stained floors, I heard the whisper. It was so faint I almost missed it, a dry, sibilant hiss that seemed to rise from the very stones. It was a single, drawn-out word that slithered into my ear. Guilty. I froze, flashlight beam trembling. I swept the light into the nearest cell. It was empty, of course. A rotting mattress frame, a bucket in the corner, and a thick blanket of undisturbed dust. No one had been in there for 100 years. Yet the sound had been so clear, so close. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. This was something else. This was an intrusion. The carefully constructed reality I maintained within these walls was being invaded by something ancient and inexplicable. My skepticism, once a shield of iron, felt as thin as paper. The prison didn't feel like an empty monument anymore. It felt occupied. And for the first time in 3 years, I was afraid of the dark. The rational part of my brain was in full revolt, screaming for an explanation. The logical scaffolding I had built around my experiences here was collapsing. The scraping sound, the fleeting shadow, the whisper, they were individual points of data that, when connected, painted a picture my mind refused to accept. I needed proof. I needed a historical anchor, something tangible to explain away the growing dread that was coiling in my gut. Instead of continuing my patrol, I rerouted to the administrative wing. The old warden's office was kept as a sort of museum piece, filled with dusty ledgers, antique furniture, and the lingering scent of cigar smoke and despair. I rarely went in there at night. It felt too much like trespassing on a tomb. But tonight, I was a desperate man, hunting for a rational ghost. I told myself I was looking for records of structural issues, reports of strange noises from the 19th century, anything to prove this was all in my head, a product of the building's decay. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating glass-fronted bookcases filled with crumbling spines. I ran my fingers over old inmate intake logs, their pages brittle as autumn leaves. Nothing. Then I saw it, a heavy, steel footlocker tucked away under the warden's massive oak desk, coated in a thick layer of dust that suggested it hadn't been opened in a very long time. The latch was stiff, but I managed to pry it open with a groan of protesting metal. Inside was a collection of personal effects, seemingly forgotten by time. Tucked beneath a set of tarnished silver cufflinks and a faded photograph of a stern-faced woman was a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was unmarked. I opened it. The ink was faded, the handwriting an elegant but increasingly frantic script. The first entry was dated 1891. It was the private journal of Warden Elias Thorne. I sat in the warden's chair, the leather cold and cracked beneath me, and began to read. For the first several pages, Thorne's entries were mundane. Notes on prison operations, complaints about funding, observations on the weather. But then, a new name appeared, and the tone of the journal shifted, darkening with every entry. Prisoner 818, Silas Croft. Thorne described Croft not as a common criminal, but as a cancer of the soul. He had been convicted of a series of gruesome ritualistic murders in Philadelphia, a man who, according to the press, worshipped dark things. In prison, he was silent, watchful, and utterly unnerving. He was eventually moved to solitary confinement in cell block 7 for his malevolent influence over the other inmates. My blood ran cold. Cell block 7, the source of the scraping. Thorne's entries became obsessive. He wrote, October 12, 1892. The scraping sound from Croft's cell is incessant. He has fashioned a shank from a spoon and spends all his hours, day and night, carving into the stone floor. The guards say he never sleeps. He just carves. When I asked him what he was doing, he looked at me with those dead eyes and smiled. He said he was not carving a way out, but carving a way in. I felt a tremor of fear run through me. I kept reading, my flashlight beam shaking. Thorne's professional detachment crumbled into raw fear. He described Croft's ritual. It wasn't an escape plan. Croft believed he could perform a great working, a curse that would bind the souls of the guilty to the place of their punishment. He wasn't trying to escape his sentence. He was trying to make it eternal, for himself and for everyone else. He calls this prison a great battery of misery, Thorne wrote. He says he will use that energy to power his final work, to chain every sinner's soul to their cell. They will not pass on. They will not find peace. They will only serve. The final entries were barely legible, the script a wild, panicked scrawl. Croft had died in his cell, but the curse was complete. Thorne wrote about the aftermath, a change in the atmosphere of the prison. The guards started hearing whispers from empty cells. They saw fleeting shapes in the corridors. The other inmates became more violent, more hopeless, as if an unseen weight had settled upon their souls. The scraping has stopped, Thorne's last entry read. But now I hear them all. They are still here. Croft has made this place a living tomb, a penitentiary for the damned. And I am their warden. God help me, I am their warden. I dropped the journal on the desk, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. It was real. This wasn't a haunted house. It was a soul trap. The rules of this horror were laid bare. The ghosts weren't wandering aimlessly. They were prisoners, still serving their sentences, bound by an occultist's final, hateful act. My first instinct was to call for help. I fumbled for my radio, my thumb slipping on the transmit button. My call was to Dave, the guard who would relieve me at dawn. He was a good guy, a meat-and-potatoes type who treated this job as nothing more than a paycheck. "Dave, you there?" "Over," I said, my voice hoarse. His voice crackled back, jovial and thick with sleep. "Leo, what's up, man? Everything all right?" "No." "Dave, listen to me. Something is happening here. Something is wrong." I tried to explain what I'd found, the journal, the sounds, the whispers. My words tumbled out, a frantic, paranoid mess. There was a long pause on the other end, then a soft chuckle. "Whoa, buddy, take it easy. Getting spooked on your last night. That old place is finally getting to you. Don't let the ghost stories bite you on the way out. I'll see you at 6. The line went dead. I was alone. Utterly and completely alone. The laughter from the tour groups, the cheesy ghost hunting shows filmed here. It was all a grotesque carnival playing out on the grounds of a real, active hell. And my shift wasn't over. Thorne's final words echoed in my head. "I am their warden." The weight of that title settled on me, cold and heavy as a burial shroud. The moment the warden's journal fell from my hands, the prison answered. The subtle hints, the furtive whispers, were over. The pretense was dropped. The scraping sound from cell block 7 began again, but it was no longer faint or distant. It was a vicious, frantic clawing, as if a whole legion of damned souls were trying to dig their way through the stone. It was joined by other sounds. From down the long, dark spoke of cell block 4, a single cell door rattled violently, the sound of metal on metal echoing like a gunshot. Then another joined it, and another, until the entire block was a cacophony of spectral rage, a chorus of trapped spirits shaking their cages. My training, my skepticism, my very sense of reality, all of it evaporated into pure, primal fear. This was no longer a historical site. It was an institution, fully operational, and I was the only living thing inside. I grabbed my heavy flashlight, its beam feeling pitifully small and inadequate, and backed out of the warden's office. The air had grown impossibly cold, my breath pluming in front of me as if it were deep winter. I had to get out. My rational mind, what was left of it, screamed a single command. Escape. The main gate was my only hope. I stumbled through the central rotunda, the sounds of the invisible inmates assaulting me from all sides. Whispers now swirled around me, no longer single words, but full, desperate sentences. "Guard. The key. So cold. Let me out of here. He sees you. The carver sees you." They were voices of pain, of anger, of eternal, soul-crushing boredom. I felt their unseen eyes on me from every darkened cell, 1,000 points of malevolent pressure. My flashlight began to flicker, its beam cutting in and out, plunging me into momentary blindness. In those flashes of darkness, the shadows seemed to leap and writhe, pulling away from the walls like living things. I felt a touch on the back of my neck, a brush of fingers as cold as freezer-burned meat. I cried out, spinning around, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive, watching darkness. I reached the main entrance hall, my heart feeling like it would explode in my chest. The massive, electronically controlled iron gate stood between me and the sane world. I slammed my hand on the release button. Nothing happened. The green light on the panel was dead. I tried it again and again, my fist pounding on the cold steel. It was useless. The power was cut. Panic gave way to a suffocating wave of despair. I was locked in, a prisoner, just like them. My radio was my last hope. I raised it to my mouth, shouting Dave's name, shouting for anyone. The only reply was a blast of static, a sound like a million snakes hissing at once. And underneath the static, I could hear something else, a faint, multi-toned wail, the sound of a choir singing a hymn of pure misery. My sanity began to fray at the edges. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. I bolted down a corridor, the rattling doors and whispering voices chasing me. I risked a glance into one of the cells as I passed and saw him. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. It was a man, or the memory of one, standing in the center of the cell. He was gaunt, his skin translucent, dressed in tattered 19th century prison stripes. His eyes were dark, hollow pits of despair, and they followed me as I ran past. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched, a silent testament to Croft's eternal sentence. I collapsed against a wall, gasping for breath, my mind a whirlwind of terror. I started talking to myself, a desperate attempt to anchor myself to reality. My name is Leo. It's my last night. I have a new job tomorrow. But the words felt hollow, like a lie. There was no tomorrow. There was only the endless night of this prison. The horror of Thorne's journal was my reality now. This wasn't a haunting. It was a duty. The prisoners were serving their sentence, and as the guard on duty, I was their unwilling overseer. My shift had become a sentence of its own. An absolute, profound silence suddenly fell over the penitentiary. The rattling stopped. The whispers died. The scraping from cell block 7 ceased. This new quiet was infinitely more terrifying than the noise it replaced. It was a waiting silence, a predatory stillness. I was being herded, toyed with, and now the game was entering its final stage. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, where I had to go. I had to face the source. I had to face the carver. My feet moved against my will, carrying me on a dead march towards cell block 7. Every step was an act of supreme effort. The air grew colder, thicker, resisting my movement. The beam of my flashlight was now a pathetic, flickering candle against an ocean of darkness. I reached the entrance to the solitary block. The door to the final cell, Silas Croft's cell, was open. Just a crack. It was a silent invitation. With a trembling hand, I pushed it open. The groan of the hinges was the only sound in the universe. I shone my light inside. The floor was a chaotic tapestry of symbols and lines, gouged deep into the stone, just as Thorne's journal had described. It pulsed with a faint, sickly energy that made my teeth ache. And in the far corner of the cell, a shadow began to peel itself away from the wall. It was impossibly tall and thin, a distortion of human form made of pure darkness. It had no features, no face, but I could feel its ancient, malevolent intelligence focused entirely on me. It was Croft. He didn't move, but his voice echoed not in the cell, but directly inside my skull. It was a voice of dry rot and graveyard dust, a voice that had not been used for a century. The sentence must be served, it thought at me, the words cold and sharp as ice picks in my brain. The guilty must be watched, a warden is always required. The shadow seemed to expand, to fill the tiny cell. Your shift is not over, it is just beginning. Now, you will watch them with me. Forever. A wave of icy despair washed over me, and my world went black. The next thing I knew, a deafening groan echoed through the prison. Sunlight, warm and brilliant, streamed through the high windows. The main gate was sliding open. My relief, Dave, stood silhouetted in the entrance, calling my name. He found me on the floor of the warden's office, clutching the old leather journal to my chest. He told me later that I was just staring into space, babbling about my shift and the prisoners. He said the most disturbing thing was my hair. It had gone from brown to a shocking stark white at the temples. I survived that night, but Leo, the skeptical history buff, died in that prison. I was discharged from my new job before I even started. I spent months in a quiet, sterile room with soft walls, trying to explain to doctors that I wasn't crazy. But how can you explain a truth that defies all reality? I live in a small apartment now, far from the city, far from any old buildings. But I am never truly alone. My last shift at Eastern State Penitentiary never ended. I was released, but I am still their warden. In the dead of night, when the world is quiet, I can still hear them. The faint, rhythmic scraping of metal on stone. The dry whispers of the damned, calling for a guard who can never let them out. I survived, but survival is its own kind of sentence. The prison left a scar on my soul, a permanent connection. Croft bound them to the prison, and in my terror, he bound me to them. I close my eyes and see the hollow faces in the dark cells. My watch is eternal,